This week's parsha is Ki Sissa. Ki Sissa literally means when you will lift, when you will raise up. What it's referring to, and I'm going to read the psukim inside, is it's talking about the giving of the machatzis shekel, the half of a shekel, which was the coin of currency. And this was used, the machatzis shekel was used to count the people. Now, we have a tradition in Judaism, we don't count people directly. You may have seen people do the not one, not two, not three, not four thing. It's not considered generally a positive thing to count people. It can cause ayin hara and all sorts of things. So the way that the people were counted in the desert, when Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to count how many people there were in the community, everyone gave exactly a half a coin, machatzis shekel, and then they would count the coins. They would count the half shekel. Machatzis shekel, is a half a shekel. They would count the half shekels that they had collected once everyone had given theirs, and then that was a way of counting, of knowing how many people there were. So, looking inside the pasuk, it says, it's called Parshas Ki Sissa. It says, Ki Sissa esresh b'nei Yisroel lefkudehem, which literally means when you will lift up or raise the heads of the Jews for their numbers, to their numbers. And what it means is basically, in plain English, when you will count the Jewish people. And it says, V'nosnu ish kofer nafshay laHashem, each person, each individual, each man will give kofer nafshay, atonement for his soul, to Hashem, when you will count them, and there will not be negev, there will not be a plague among them when you count them. Why won't there be a plague? Because you will be counting them with half coins instead of pointing to them and saying 1, 2, 3, 4, which is a bad thing. Then it continues, Zeh yitnu, this is what they shall give. Machatzis hashekel, they will give a half a coin, b'shekel hakodesh of the shekel hakodesh. Esrim geira hashekel, then the pasuk continues, how much is a shekel? A shekel is esrim geira. Geira is the next level down of the currency. It would be like saying $1 is 100 cents. So a shekel is 20 geira, and therefore machatzis hashekel, and they, not therefore, but they will give machatzis hashekel a half of this 20 geira, which will be therefore 10 geira. So, note at the beginning of this second pasuk that I read out, the second verse says, Zeh yitnu, this is what they shall give. Which is a kind of interesting way to word it. Because it could have just said, they shall give. The pasuk could have started halfway through and said, Esrim gera hashekel, a gera is 20 shekel, machatzis hashekel, they will give half a shekel. Why does it say, this, Zeh yitnu, this is what they will give? And we have a general rule, something that's referred to a lot throughout various parts of Torah, is the word zeh. When you say zeh, zeh is this. And this isn't some sort of strange rule. It's most basic meaning of the word zeh. When you say this, it means you're referring to something directly. Generally, it's something that you could point to. Zeh, this thing that we are referring to that is in plain sight in front of us, this. You don't say this about something that's halfway across the world, you would say that. So when we say this, it means we're referring to something that's in plain sight. So the Medrash says, why did Hashem say, this is what they shall give, Zeh yitnu? So it says, Kamin matbeya shel eish, as an image of a coin of fire, a flaming coin, Hashem showed to Moshe, Hashem took out mitachas kisei hakavod, from under the kisei hakavod, from under his throne of glory, and showed to Moshe Rabbeinu. So Hashem was doing this presumably to resolve some sort of issue that Moshe had, and Hashem saying, it's this here is an image, I'm showing you an image, a representation of what they will give. But the question is, what exactly was Hashem coming to explain to Moshe with this visualization, with this image? What is it that hard? Is it rocket science to understand what a half a shekel is? Hashem said, by the way, I know it's really confusing what a half shekel is. It's this coin. Have a look. What's so confusing about a half shekel? Anyone who knows the basics of currency would know what a half shekel coin is. And the answer is, Hashem wasn't coming to show him which coin it would be. Hashem was coming to address something else. And the issue, the difficulty that Moshe Rabbeinu had, that Hashem was coming to address, was going back to the verse, and I mentioned it and read it, but kind of rushed through it without pointing it out at that point. Hashem says, when you will count the people, V'nosnu, and they will give kofer nafsho, an atonement for the soul. What's this atonement? They're giving a coin, they're giving coins to be counted. What atonement are we talking about? And the answer is that there were a number. First of all, this machatzis shekel, this counting by half shekel, happened a few times. And when they gave this half shekel, it was an atonement for something very specific. It was an atonement for the sin of the golden calf. So they were giving this coin and it was atonement, and Moshe was just confused. How is giving a coin going to atone for the golden calf? And this is very specific difficulty, because the idea of atonement is not new. The idea of doing some sort of specific process to atone for sin, this is not the first time we see it. This has already happened previously. Hashem has already told Moshe Rabbeinu, told the people about sacrifices, for example, that can be brought to atone for sin. And Moshe Rabbeinu didn't there start wondering, well, how can this atonement happen? And Hashem had to bring out a flaming sacrifice from under the Kisei HaKoved, under the throne of glory. So what's going on here? There was something very specific that Moshe had a great difficulty with understanding. And that is that atoning for a specific sin, someone did something wrong, atone for it. Okay. Makes sense. I can understand maybe how atonement can work. But here we're talking about the Egel HaZohav. The Egel HaZohav wasn't just a sin. The Egel HaZohav, the golden calf, what happened? The golden calf was an act of idolatry. Now, just to put things in perspective with a little bit of context, when Hashem gave the Torah, when Hashem said the Aseret Dibros on Har Sinai, on Mount Sinai, Hashem said, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, Hashem said the first of the 10 commandments, and the revelation of godliness, God literally spoke these words. Whatever that means, God doesn't have a mouth and a throat, etc., but God spoke these words. We experience the words coming directly from God's, so to speak, mouth, let's call it, for lack of a better term, without spending an hour talking about it, which I'd love to do, but I don't think it's a good idea. Right? So, these words came directly from God and we experienced them. What happened? The Gemara says, we all died. The entire Jewish people died on the spot from this exposure to divinity, to God himself. So Hashem had to bring us back to life and Tchias HaMesim. Second commandment, Lo yeh lecha elokim acherim, you shall not have any other gods, the prohibition of idolatry. What happened? We all died. Again. What happened? Hashem, excuse me, brought us back to life again. And then what happens? Jewish people come to Moshe Rabbeinu and say, enough. We died twice. Enough of the dying already. Can you please go have your dialogue with Hashem? Apparently you can handle it better than we can. And then you'll come and pass it on and give it over to us. Moshe was like, that doesn't sound right. And Hashem said, it's okay. It makes sense. It's a good strategy. Hashem told the rest of them over to Moshe, and Moshe passed them on to us. Now, very interesting. We have a pasuk that says, Torah tziva lanu Moshe. The Torah, tziva lanu Moshe, Moshe commanded, Moshe gave over to us, instructed us. The word Torah has a numerical value of 611. Tov is 400, Vav is 6, 406, Reish is 200, 606, Hey is 5, 611. There are 613 mitzvahs. The first 2 mitzvahs were not instructed to us by Moshe on Hashem's behalf. The first 2 mitzvahs in the Torah, to believe in Hashem and not to serve idolatry, came from Hashem himself, not through Moshe. The other 611, Moshe instructed us on behalf of Hashem. The reason these 2 had to come specifically from Hashem is because they are the foundation and the basis of everything else. Believing in Hashem, in the one true God, in the Creator, and not believing in any other God is the basis of the entire Torah and mitzvahs. So these 2 came to us directly from Hashem. These 2 mitzvahs form the basis of our relationship with Hashem. If a person doesn't believe in Hashem, if a person believes in or worships other gods, other deities, then our entire relationship with Hashem, the whole premise based upon which we're serving God, is flawed. And that's a fault in our entire relationship with God, our entire commitment, our entire observance of Judaism. So, idolatry is not just a sin like any other sin. Idolatry is literally saying that, this relationship that we have with you, God, not so much. Basically. It's going and having a relationship with another God. Even if it's not entirely denying Hashem's existence and Hashem's authority and everything else, it's introducing another, so to speak, God, lowercase g, into the equation. Which, even though it may not mean that we don't believe in God at all, it does completely destroy the integrity of our relationship with Hashem. So idolatry is the foundation, or not being involved in idolatry is the foundation of it is our entire relationship with God. Everything else is the things we do because of our relationship. They're the details of the relationship, but the foundation of the relationship is these two mitzvahs: believe in God, don't believe in any other God, which is why these two we heard from Hashem himself. So now Moshe Rabbeinu is saying, we're not talking about breaking Shabbos, eating non-kosher, whatever it is. We're talking about literally undermining our entire relationship with the Creator. How are we just atoning for that and making it all better, making it go away by giving a half a shekel to charity? This is weird. What's going on? So Hashem showed him this matbeya shel eish, this coin of fire, this flaming coin, mitachas kisei hakavod. That explains everything, right? Well, apparently it does. The question is how. Because so far it doesn't seem to answer a whole lot. The question seems like a pretty good one, and an image of a flaming coin doesn't seem to really resolve things. And apparently it did for Moshe. So the question is, what was the message? What's the message that is personified by this flaming coin, this flaming half shekel coin from under Hashem's throne of glory, that somehow explains the atonement for idolatry, for undermining our entire relationship with Hashem? And there are a few elements to this. So, go inside just for a moment. Now, what's going to be important here, or part of what's going to be important, is looking at the details of this mitzvah, and we're going to see them to an extent explained actually in the pasuk once we get in and nitpick in the words in the pasuk, in the verse in which Hashem commanded them to bring this half shekel. Mitzvah's commandments are not arbitrary. They're not random. Everything is very deliberate. Every detail is intentional. So, and as I guess an analogy, we as people, every single one of us in this room has a soul. Every single one of us in the room has a body. Every one of our bodies is different to everyone else's. And every one of our souls is different to everyone else's. And they have to be, because the soul and the body are partners. And my body and my soul were created to interact together in partnership. And my soul matches my body matches my soul, and which is why, and they are paired together then to do a job. A human soul in a cow's body wouldn't work, and a cow soul in a human body wouldn't work, and my soul in any of your bodies, or your souls in my body, wouldn't work either, because they're specific. The same way that a person has a body and a soul, and they are designed specifically to match each other in detail. And it's not just that they match each other, they match my purpose. Every one of us in here has a specific purpose, a specific role to play in the purpose of creation, a specific role to play in completing the universe, in making this world into a dwelling place for the Creator, into uniting matter and spirit. Every one of us has a unique contribution to make, and our bodies and our souls are specifically matched to our specific missions. My body and my soul have talents, strengths, weaknesses that are specifically suited to my specific role, whatever that is. And obviously my talents are going to be suited to what I have to achieve. My challenges are going to be suited to some of the things that I need to overcome, and that's going to be true for each of us individually. So our challenges are intentional as much as our gifts are intentional. Everything about us is intentional. That's true of our body and of our soul. And the same is true of mitzvahs. Every mitzvah has a body. What's the body of a mitzvah? The body of a mitzvah is the action, the act that you do. The body of charity is the act of taking the coin and putting it in the charity box. The act of swiping the credit card and buying food for someone. Whatever it is. The soul, there are a few elements to it. Part of it is the intent and our personal connection with that action. It's our motivation and drive. And it's this spiritual process that goes hand in hand with the physical action. So whatever happens spiritually, whatever the spiritual counterpart of the act of any mitzvah is going to be represented by the nature of the act, the nature of the physical mitzvah, because the body of the mitzvah matches the soul of the mitzvah. So whatever spiritual process is happening when we do a particular mitzvah is going to be represented by the physical characteristics of that mitzvah. So somehow this mitzvah of giving this half a coin, this machatzis shekel, somehow atones for not just the sin, but for idolatry, for the sin of the golden calf. If we look to the physical characteristics of this mitzvah, the details, and what they represent, that should give us some sort of direction, some sort of hint as to what the spiritual process, the spiritual outcome, and the spiritual counterpart of this physical mitzvah is, which will help us understand how it atones for the sin of idolatry. And there are a few elements to this. We're going to look at a number of details in the pasuk. There's an analogy that the Baal Shem Tov gives to someone who is learning to be some sort of smith. It could be a goldsmith, it could be a blacksmith, it could be a silversmith. The analogy works equally well for all of them. And we have an apprentice, and someone who from a young age is working in a smithy together with this master craftsman in whatever sort of smithery it is. And from a young age is learning and is there from the morning till the evening and is learning all the different elements of the process. And, after 15 years of apprenticeship, having learnt from the best, from the master at the top of the food chain in this specific craft, this apprentice should be capable of being really up there in terms of this craft. Let's call it a blacksmith just for the sake of being less ambiguous. So this now young adult has been learning this craft for 15 years and knows every part of the process, I have no idea what the details even are, so I'm not going to list them, but all the different parts of the process that are involved, from taking, the ore before you even have the steel, and whatever the process is for extracting the steel, and then for processing it and molding it and shaping it and making it high quality and making it look good and making it durable and making it do whatever it needs to do, making it be functional. All of these details is an expert. But there's one process that somehow the master craftsman forgot to teach the apprentice. How to light the fire. Or just to light the fire. So then this apprentice moves out on his own, and he's bought a shop and all the tools and everything, and he's come and put the ore into whatever sort of device they use to extract the steel, or the ingredients, the different metals that are combined into steel, whatever it is, and is waiting for it to melt and for things to start happening, and is waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. Because everything depends on the fire. Now, a fire in and of itself isn't going to do the job. Just lighting a fire is not going to create steel utensils. It's not going to do much of anything. I mean, it'll make the place warm. But being an expert in all of those skills, all the necessary skills involved in the craft, are also useless unless you light the fire. So fire represents something that isn't actually the craft itself, but is the foundation for the craft being able to be successful. And this is why when Hashem showed this to Moshe Rabbeinu, he showed him a flaming coin. He was telling Moshe Rabbeinu, when you give this machatzis shekel, and when we're going to talk more about what machatzis shekel represents for us personally today, it's about the fact that this coin is on fire. It's a flaming coin. What is this flame? What is the fire which, although it's not the craft, it's the foundation of the craft, and the foundation of the craft being able to be successful? What is fire? What do we know about fire? Fire is hot. Did you say hot? Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. It's not rocket science. It wasn't a trick question. Fire is hot. Right? Fire moves, it dances, flames move around up and down all over the place. And this represents, in human experience, in human life, it represents excitement, passion, involvement. And excitement, passion, involvement are never going to achieve anything in and of themselves. Right? And this is a really important lesson to remember. Something happens, whether it's something negative that we want to respond to, whether it's something positive that's inspiration and we get inspired. It's very important to remember that inspiration and passion don't achieve things. Lighting an enormous fire in the smithy isn't going to result in utensils coming out at the end of the day. But having a big hot fire will mean that the craftsman will be able to create those utensils. We have to make sure when we get inspired, when we're passionate, and even if it's not we're inspired and passionate, but when we are working on inspiring ourselves and awakening our passion, we don't just focus on inspiration and passion. It's very easy to get excited about inspiration and passion. But they themselves are not going to do anything. They're not going to get anything done. If, however, we connect them to processes, we say, okay, I'm inspired. Now let me make a commitment of something specific and tangible that I am going to do to channel this passion, to channel this excitement. Now, this passion, this excitement, this inspiration are going to be able to be the driving force behind real change. And the reality in life is that oftentimes it can feel almost like a bit of a downer. It's like I'm super excited and passionate and I want to change the world and revolutionize the human experience and ... etc., etc., etc. And then it's like, okay, so how am I going to do this? Like, yeah, it would be cool if I would become president of the world today and just be able to do whatever I want. But that's not realistic. And then we stop and think, what is realistic? What can I actually do practically today to make a real change in the world? Generally, that's what it boils down to. Changing ourselves, changing our environments. And when we look at practically, for most of us, what we're able to realistically do, it doesn't look like something that's going to change the world today. And when we're inspired about changing the world, it's kind of like, oh, so what am I going to do? I'm going to dive in a little, focus a bit more on my prayer. I'm going to give a little bit more charity. I'm going to do another mitzvah. Yeah, that's going to change the world. And the answer is it will. And the reality is that that's what we can do. And some of us are in positions to do things that are more global and have larger collective effects. And that's fine and good, but the bottom line is for all of us, we have to stop and take that inspiration and figure out what can I practically really do to make the world a better place, then make a real, tangible, concrete commitment that will then be the process that this fire will drive, that this passion will drive, that the inspiration will drive, so that something will actually come out of it at the end of the day. And little things can make a big difference. We have no idea what the real outcomes of our actions are, what the magnitude of those outcomes are. And this is just a very specific example that doesn't quite illustrate the enormity of this, but there was a story of, I may not have all the details precisely accurate, but I think this is the story. There were a couple of, there's something called Mekashlichas. Mekashlichas is when in the summertime, when yeshivas are on break. So the older bachrim, the guys who were studying in the older guys who were studying in yeshivas like 770, etc., go on what's called Marrakesh, which basically generally means traveling to regional places where Jewish resources for Torah Judaism are sparse, are hard to come by, and to go and visit people, look people up, try to talk to people, get people who don't really have exposure to Torah Judaism during the year, try to visit them, get them inspired, get them involved, help them out with resources as much as possible. So two guys come back to the Rebbe, and this is going back easy. Today anywhere you go, you whip out your phone, you look up Google, Facebook, you'll find a couple of Jews almost no matter where you are, and you can find them and you can visit them. Once upon a time, going back several decades, going back 40 years, 30 years, 50 years, guys would, hop on a train and travel for 2 days to somewhere and go to the post office and pull out like an actual phone book, if any of you have ever seen one, right? And look for the Jewish names and ask if anybody knows any Jews. It wasn't so simple. The reach that people had was much more limited than it is today. And so guys come back and they just spent a month traveling and literally didn't find a single Jew. These guys lived on crackers and sardines for a month, traveling in trains and staying in random places from one place to the next, and didn't find a single Jew. And they came back to the Rebbe really, really depressed. Really, really upset. When they were motivated, it's not that they weren't prepared to put in the work and to make the sacrifice, but they would have liked to at least meet one Jewish person and talk to them about something Jewish, but no one. And they come back to the Rebbe and they're telling the Rebbe about what happened and how upset they are. And the Rebbe opens a drawer and pulls out a letter that he had just received from a lady who lives, an older lady who lives in one of the towns that they'd been traveling through. And one day she had looked out the window and seen this most random thing she hadn't seen in decades. She sees these two young Jewish men with, their traditional clothing and their beards and their payas and their tzitzis hanging out. Walking down the street, excited to be doing what they were doing. She didn't know what they were doing there or what they were talking about, but they were clearly passionate about whatever it is that they were talking about. And it reminded her about her youth and about growing up in her parents' house and around her grandmother and the things that she had seen. And she started lighting Shabbos candles again because of the memories that were sparked when she saw these guys walking down the street out the window. Now that just changed. Just imagine what just happened for these two guys standing in this room. It just changed everything. Right? And this is one story where they happen to have been lucky to find out what happened. Just think about all the stories that we don't know about the outcomes of our actions. We have no idea when we walk down the street at any moment on any given time, just doing the things we're supposed to be doing, walking down the street the way that we're supposed to be walking down the street, interacting with people the way that we're supposed to be interacting, just being a mensch, just representing Torah Judaism the way that we're supposed to. We have no idea who's watching, who's seeing. And these are just the outcomes that we're not aware of within the physical reality in terms of things that happen in other people's experiences that we're not aware of. Let alone the things that happen spiritually that we're not aware of, that we have no way of ever being aware of, and things that may happen physically as a result. Not because someone saw us, but because our actions caused some sort of trickle effect that traveled through spiritual worlds and traveled back down and landed somewhere in a different time on the other side of the world and affected someone somewhere else and changed their life. We have no idea what our actions cause. So one little thing, one little tangible thing, putting one extra coin in the pushka, doing one extra favor, doing one extra mitzvah, learning an extra 60 seconds of Torah, squeezing it in somewhere in between two other obligations because we've decided we're going to try to stick in an extra 5 minutes of Torah study wherever we can during the day, whatever it is. It seems like a little thing, but nothing's little, and we have no idea what the magnitude is. So when we get inspired, when we have that fire, when we have that passion, wanting to change the world is a good thing. But just wanting to change the world doesn't change the world. Wanting doesn't do anything. Actions do things. Actions achieve. Desires don't achieve. inspiration and passion don't achieve. If we channel that inspiration and passion into tangible commitments, those can achieve. Just like in the blacksmith, if there's no fire, you can be expert in every other part of the process. You're not going to have a process because there's no fire driving it. So while on one hand the fire itself doesn't actually generate results, the fire is the driving force behind the process that does generate results. And just for us practically, it's important to keep in mind whenever we do get inspired, take something realistic and tangible and tie the inspiration down to that by making some sort of commitment that's realistic and tangible. Now, what does this fire represent for us in our daily lives? Fire is passion. Fire is excitement. Something else that fire represents is Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom. Ner Hashem, the light, the candle of God. Nishma Sodom is the soul of man, the soul of a person. The soul of mankind. So the fire represents not what we do and not how we feel, but who we are, what we are. And again, as I think I talked last week about the word mahus, mahus. The word mahus, which means essence, is mahus. Ma means what. It's the whatness, literally, is the translation. It's what we are. Fire represents the essence of the soul, who and what we are at the deepest level. And that's because who and what we are at the deepest level is divinity, is a part of the Creator. Our soul at its core is a part of the Creator. And the Creator is represented to an extent by fire. And Hashem was telling Moshe, if you want, the reason why machatzis hashekel, this half coin, can be an atonement for idolatry, can be an atonement for jeopardizing the entirety of your relationship with me, is because this half coin, although you don't see it in the coin, but when we look in the details and break it down, it's about the fire. It's about your passion and excitement in your relationship with me, which is an outcome. It is the essence of who you are. And when you, and who we are at our deepest core is inseparable from the Creator. Right? Children can rebel against their parents. They can behave in ways that are atrocious and not acceptable and create huge chasms between themselves and their parents. And these chasms can exist. But at the end of the day, a child is always a parent's child no matter what. And that will never change. Right? And we have, there's an analogy that's given for the shofar, the blowing of the shofar. One of the things that the shofar is associated with tshuva. We blow it in Rosh Hashanah in preparation for Rosh Hashanah. One of the things that the shofar represents is, in super short, the analogy of this prince who the king sends him to journey to see the world as part of his process of maturation and development. If he's going to be the king one day, he has to know how the world works and what goes on. So the prince leaves and he completely loses his way and completely gets distracted by things the world has to offer, kinds of fun that he was never exposed to, temptations he was never exposed to in the palace, and loses his way to the extent that he even forgets the languages and is no longer able to even engage in dialogue with his father, can't even say his father's name, doesn't remember anything. But then one day when he remembers who he is and decides it's time to come back, and he shows up at the castle, and he looks so different that the guards don't even recognize him and don't even know who he is, and he can't call out to them, he can't talk to them because he doesn't speak the language, and he can't even call out to his father by name or title because he doesn't remember the name and the title. And he just cries out from the depth of his soul. As much as this son has rebelled and as much as he's lost his way and as distant as he has become from his father, when the father hears that cry from the depths of his son's soul, he's going to come out and embrace his son and bring his son back in. Because at the end of the day, who we are will never change. And just like a child at their core is their parent's child, and that can and will not ever change, the fact that we at our core are this fire, this flame, we are a part of divinity itself, can never change. Now, in our behaviors, we can become separated from God. And to an extent, the parts of our soul that interact with our body, the parts of our soul that are expressed on a daily basis, can become separated from God. But the core, the essence of our soul, our mahus, our whatness, what we are, is a piece of divinity. So at the end of the day, who we are deep down can never become separated from God. And so no matter what we do, idolatry, cheating on God, jeopardizing our entire relationship with God, at the end of the day, at our essence, our mahus, what we are, is still connected to God. That's that fire. Hashem said, you want to know how you can atone for cheating on me? You want to know how you can atone for idolatry? It's all about that fire, the core of your soul, which is me. So if you can just somehow manage to get in touch with that, that natural outcome of that will be automatically atonement for everything, including idolatry. The question now becomes, okay, that's nice. Hashem showed him a coin on fire. But what does that have to do with an actual half shekel? Right? We didn't take a coin and dip it in, in propane and light it on fire and then give it over. We just took a coin and gave it, a half shekel coin. So where does this fire thing, where are we seeing this? How is this represented? Right? Earlier on, I was saying that the body of the mitzvah matches the soul of the mitzvah. So when we look at the action, the physical act and process of this mitzvah, it should represent the soul of this mitzvah and the spiritual process and outcome of this mitzvah. So how is this represented by this coin? This goes back to the pasuk. In the pasuk, the coin that they gave, this was a specific coin. It was a half shekel coin. And we are told two things about it. First of all, it's a half shekel. And a shekel is 20 gerah. You're giving a half a shekel, which is 10 gerah. So why do we have to be told twice? Tell us we have to give a 10 gerah coin. Tell us we have to give a half shekel coin. Practically speaking, right, and here the truth is in America you don't see this as much because there is actually a $50 coin which we refer to as a $50. But in many currencies you wouldn't refer to. In Australia, for example, there's a 50-cent coin and there's a dollar coin. Right? It's not called a $50 because who cares what it's a half of? It's 50 cents. You're not paying with this coin because it's $50. If something costs 50 cents, you're paying a 50-cent coin because the thing costs 50 cents. Who cares if it's a $50? We don't care that it's not $1 and that it's only halfway. We care that it is 50 cents. Makes sense to refer to it as a 50-cent coin. So the pasuk could have said, you should give 10 gerah. Why the emphasis on the fact that 10 gerah is a half a shekel and a whole shekel is 20 gerah? And you are going to give a half of a shekel. There's clearly something that the pasuk, the Torah, is trying to emphasize to us, something about this half. And before we're told about the 20 gerah, we're told, you will give a half shekel. What are you giving? You're giving a half a shekel. Now, for practicality's sake, you need to know that a half a shekel is 10 gerah, a shekel's 20 gerah, so you're giving half 10. So now to understand what the soul of this mitzvah is and what's happening, what's this representing, and how this is serving as atonement for idolatry, for literally cheating on God, this is going to become clear when we look at the fact that it's 10 gerah specifically. A shekel is intentionally 20 gerah. We are giving not just 10 gera, but a half a shekel. And we're told about the half shekel before. We're told the amount that a half shekel represents or is worth is 10 gera. One second. So what is 10 gera? And how is 10 gera? Or what does the number 10 represent? Why is the number 10 only half? Right, we talk all the time about 10 is the completion, the system, the structure based on which everything is built, physical, spiritual souls, spiritual worlds, God's own divine attributes, everything's built on a structure of 10. How is 10 half? 10 seems to be the full thing, the whole system. 10 represents, or not 10 represents, but one of the ways, one of the places in which we see the number 10 is the 10 koiches hanefesh, the 10 faculties, the 10 abilities, the 10 functions of the soul. We have the 3 intellectual, chachma bin das, conception, comprehension, connection, chesed, gvur, tiferes, kindness, strength, etc., etc. Chesed, gvur, tiferes, netzach, yisod, malchus. So these are the 10 koiches hanefesh, the 10 abilities, 10 faculties of the soul. There are the 10 spheres, the 10 elements of spiritual realities, which go by the same names. They're equivalent. They're not the same things, but they're equivalents in a different context. There are Hashem's own divine attributes, which go by the same names. So looking at ourselves, the full toolkit that our soul has, all the abilities, all the functions that it has, 3 intellectual, 7 emotional, generally speaking, it's a very general categorization. These are the 10 abilities that the soul has. Although that is complete in the context of just looking at the soul itself, we have to remember that the soul itself is only half the picture. The soul on its own is not a complete entity. In the context of what the soul is, and the tools that the soul has at its disposal, yes, 10 is the complete system. But looking more globally, zooming out, the soul itself is not complete. The soul is, Nishmas Adam is Ner Hashem. It's this light of God. As long as we look at ourselves as complete entities, we're going to be very, very limited. And this is where things get really kind of confusing, and we're going to have a bit of an oxymoron. And I guess we should get into it a little, because people, we talk about bittul, which, let's call it nullification, a lack of sense of self, a lack of ego, whatever we want to call it. These are different things that refer to different elements of bittul. This is the ultimate achievement, but we can stop and look and say, you know what, maybe it's the ultimate achievement, but honestly, I'm not so interested. I quite enjoy existing. I don't completely want to just abdicate any sense of self and any sense of, personal existence and relevance and significance, and just completely let go, and my entire experience should just become about God. Yeah, it's noble, but it doesn't sound that exciting, right? And on one hand, noble is noble, exciting or not, the right thing to do is the right thing to do. But it's not as simple as that. It depends on how we view and value our sense of self, and how we view and value becoming one with the Creator. Now, in order to appreciate becoming one and letting go of ourself and becoming one with the Creator, we have to have already some sort of appreciation for the trueness of the Creator and the ultimate value of the Creator, and the fact that at the end of the day, the Creator is the one and only truth and ultimate good and true infinity. Whatever we can not only achieve, because at the end of the day, achievement is also noble, but it's not only about achieving, it's about experiencing. Right? If we want to look at this even just from a selfish experience, from a selfish perspective, which again is an oxymoron considering what we're talking about, but just in terms of what we can experience, right? If I were to tell you that think about everything you know and everything you've experienced, there's this place where you can go and they offer the ability to experience things that you cannot even imagine. Take the best experience you could possibly imagine, multiply it by 1 trillion, raise it to the power of 1 trillion again, and it doesn't compare to the experience that these people in this place can offer you. Now, you know that you don't know what that experience is, but it sounds like it's pretty good. And you just might be interested in finding out more about it and finding out about how you can get there and to personally achieve this experience. So when it comes to Bittul, once we understand the truth of divinity and true absolute infinity, and we understand that we ourselves are very limited. What we can achieve is limited, and what we can experience is limited. We can only experience the extent of the experience that we are capable of having is based on our senses, on our mind, our perception, and our environment, and the things that we are able to interact with and be exposed to. Which may be pretty big, but at the end of the day, it's very clearly defined. Now, if we can let go of all of that and no longer have the limitations of our abilities and our own perspective, and no longer be limited by the surroundings, by our surroundings and our environment, and the experiences that we are currently limited to being able to be exposed to, and we can now experience something that is infinitely beyond anything we could imagine, that could be a good thing. Our sense of self limits what we are able to experience. The less our life is defined by our sense of self, the less we ourselves are defined by our sense of self. And also keeping in mind this expression the Gemara says that about someone who is self-centered, or the specific term there is arrogant, Hashem says, this individual and I cannot coexist. Why? It's very simple. You can't have two things in one place. If I am full of myself, there's no room, for Hashem in me. If my experience is self-centered, it's not Hashem-centered. If my experience is not just consumed by myself, but I make room for my experience to be filled with divinity, I let go of all these things that define myself and my sense of self, and I embrace infinity, I now become able to experience things, to have an experience that was impossible when my self and my experience was defined by my sense of self and who I am and my strengths and weaknesses. As soon as we realize that the 10 that we have, our 10 koichas hanefesh, our full toolkit, is only half a shekel, it's not the full picture. Our entire complete full self, 10 gera, is only half of a shekel, because a shekel's 20 gera. We're never going to have 20 koichas hanefesh. We're never going to have 20 functionalities of the soul, because it only has 10. But as soon as we let go of our own abilities defining our experience and defining our life, we let go of our self-centeredness. And by self-centeredness, I don't mean arrogance and being inconsiderate. Being inconsiderate generally would be described as being self-centered, but a much less acute, perhaps we could call it, self-centeredness. At the end of the day, we can be considerate people, and hopefully we all are considerate and good and nice and kind. But at the end of the day, our experience still revolves around ourselves. It just does. That's the nature of being a human being. It doesn't mean we don't care about other people, but to some extent, we're all self-centered. Now, if we can, bit by bit, learn to let go of that and to replace our self-centeredness with infinity-centeredness, with divinity-centeredness, our experience becomes less limited to the things that define ourself and becomes more defined by infinity. Now, another oxymoron here is that at the end of the day, practically speaking, the real way to achieve this is not to let go of self, because letting go of self doesn't really work. It's not really possible. What we can do is learn more about infinity, learn about divinity, learn about what, let's call it, for argument's sake, the nature of the Creator, and think about it. Marinate, let it marinate. Let it become a part of the way we see things. Let our awareness of the Creator become a part of our worldview and our perspective and the way we see the world around us. And as that grows and increases, the natural result will be that our self-centeredness will fade away. You can't remove darkness from the room, but you can add light and then it ceases to be dark. The more we focus on the ultimate truth, on divinity, on the Creator, on the absolute infinity, the less we become focused on ourselves. The less we're focused on ourselves, the less our experience is consumed by self, the more it's consumed by the Creator. The more we recognize that we are only half, right? And that's the key. The key is not to the key here is to recognizing that although 10 is the completion of who we are, it's only half the picture. When we're aware of that, and we're aware of the fact that the other 10 that makes up the complete picture is the Creator, the more we're aware of that, the less our experience will be dominated by our sense of self. And therefore, the less our experience will be limited by the parameters that define ourselves. The more our experience will become infinite. The more our actual life will become filled with infinity, with divinity, with the Creator itself. And this is the atonement for cheating on God. This is the atonement for idolatry, for serving something other than God. The atonement for that is the exact opposite. It's recognizing that 10, who we are, is only half the picture. When do you have a complete shekel? You only have a complete shekel when you have 10 and 10 together combined into one. When our experience, our self, our consciousness is filled with divinity, is filled with the Creator, our focus is centered around the Creator, our awareness is all about the Creator, automatically we see ourselves as only half the picture. We see the full picture, the full shekel is us and the Creator as one. And because our perspective is no longer limited by our sense of self, but it's filled with the Creator, our experience literally becomes less limited by the parameters that define ourself. Our experience is able to be filled with infinity, with divinity. And that's the fire. The fire is who we are. Who we are is divinity at our core. And that's why Hashem showed Moshe this flaming half shekel coin. Hashem was telling Moshe, yes, atoning for idolatry is kind of hard. It's not a simple thing to do because this is a big deal, but half a shekel is 10 gerah. A full shekel is 20 gerah. When you are aware of the fact that your full 10 is only half a shekel, and that it's only when you unite with the other half of yourself, with divinity, with the Creator, that you have a full shekel. When you have that awareness, then your 10 gerah, the abilities that your soul does have, go on fire. They become passionate. They become inspired. And when you have this passion, this inspiration, when the fire, the divinity that is who you are, now takes over not only your core sense of self, your essence, but your actual behavior, when the things that you do, when the 10 faculties of your soul, the parts of your soul that are practically effective and relevant, go on fire because they are permeated with this awareness and recognition of divinity, that is how you atone. The awareness, the recognition of the truth, to an extent that it actually permeates your consciousness, your perspective, your awareness, your experience, and therefore your actions, and your actions go on fire as a result. Your actions become inspired and passionate, which is fire. Your actions then actually represent and become one with who you are at your core, with the divinity that is who you are at your essence, which is represented by fire. And that is how you atone for idolatry. Because idolatry at the end of the day is separating oneself from divinity. The atonement is going to be reuniting and becoming one with divinity, to the extent that it completely consumes our experience. And the 10 faculties of the soul, the practical part of who we are in a way that's practically relevant to our experiences and our actions, goes on fire and becomes consumed with divinity. That's the atonement. Boom.